Well, today's gospel reading is the last chapter of the Gospel of John. We heard last week what traditionally sounds like the last chapter of John. If you go to the few verses of John chapter 20, it kind of gives you this, like, in a movie, fade to black, white text. This is what happens. And Jesus did a lot of other things that we can't actually write in this book. And then this chapter happens, which feels like a modern-day Marvel movie where there's a post-credit scene, just to highlight some little extra story. And that's where this story comes in. And this story has like three big movements. You get this fishing story where they don't recognize Jesus and they catch a bunch of fish, 157, which they name. The volumes of commentary on the number 157 will bore you to tears. I love all branches of Christianity to some extent. They are my sisters and brothers in Christ. What? You got St. Jerome, who ends up saying, there are only 157 breeds of fish. No, that didn't age well, St. Jerome. At the time of Jesus, there were only 157 countries. No, that didn't age well either. I don't always agree with the founder of Methodism, but John Wesley said, the number doesn't matter. Hey, he ends up saying, he goes, the 157 matters to the tune that it fed the early church. It strengthened them for the ministry of the early church. Bingo, we'll go with that. So you get the fishing, and then you get the cooking scene, him on the beach. And you actually get the resurrected Jesus hungry enough to eat. All right. I'm there. And then there's this follow-up story of back and forth with Peter. That's kind of like the framework of the three stories. And some of this should sound a little bit familiar, and that's really the point of this. Almost every part. There's two things to start off with. One, the fishing narrative, the fishing story. They don't know who Jesus is, and he gives them clear directions. Cast your nets, pull up the fish. And it's so much that it almost bursts the net, but doesn't. We've heard this story, but not in John, not in the Gospel according to St. John. We heard this story in the Gospel according to St. Luke. And in that story, it happens in like the 5th chapter. Here in John, this is almost a word-for-word retelling, only it's post-resurrection. And with this story, if you put this narratively there, it kind of gives you a different sense of what these early disciples did. They went back after 3 years of following Jesus, after the resurrection, they went back to their parents' job. They reverted, and Jesus came looking for them. Why? This is one of those times where it's like, the early church, the church history, we have put the disciples on such pillars. And here, they just seem the most human beings. Because I have said more often than not, if I had seen a miracle, I would follow Jesus more closely. If I had seen, someone rise from the dead, if I had been there with the fish, I would have changed my life so and I could never go back. Here are the guys who literally followed Jesus. They saw the resurrection, and are they instantly now they're pillars starting the ministry of the church, they're off building congregations and gathering thousands? No, they went back to work. They went back to day jobs. Yeah. It's familiar for the disciples as a whole. And then there's Peter. How many times did Jesus ask, do you love me? 3. Somebody asked Peter a question 3 times. Somebody asked Peter a question 3 times. Does that ring any other bell? Maybe one we just got through in Holy Week. Someone asked Peter, aren't you one of his? And Peter denies him 3 times. Here there's a reverse of that. Like an earlier version of Peter being re-witnessed. some new lens to look at him. And now you have Jesus, who's, one of my favorite writers, Leonard Sweet. He writes, if you're reading the Gospel being hungry, you're reading the wrong Gospels. Wherever Jesus goes, he's got his fingers in food or in his face, right? Because here it is, he's hungry. The resurrected Jesus, and it's these kind of repeating stories of one of the common elements of the early church is food. Thanks be to God for this tradition to continue. Now, there's one element of this story I have never understood. I have always kind of tripped up about. And when I thought about it this week, when it clicked, when it finally showed up, I had such an aha moment, the whole rest of the sermon wrote itself. Because I've been struggling with this one detail. There's one detail of the story that I have gone, why? And you read it real quick, because we're from the Midwest, and we're kind of squeamish about this sort of thing. It says, Jesus is calling. The disciples are like, hey, Peter, Jesus is on the beach. And Peter quickly covered up because he was naked. Peter is a professional fisherman. Why is he fishing naked? Why? It has bothered me. This is one of these, there aren't a whole lot of stories of the resurrected Jesus, and he's fishing naked. Stand back for a second. Now, in order for me to do this, I got to do this really, really quickly. If I lose you, I can't go back. You got to catch me, fellowship, all right? It works for the whole Gospel of John. Remember, if I leave you anything, when it comes to the Gospels, I am always trying to pull apart gospel stew. They don't all sound the same. They all have a distinct voice. The Gospel of John has a very distinct voice. The Gospel of John writes Jesus' life in 7 signs. Everybody say 7. Gospel of John, Jesus' life is broken up in 7 signs that he's the Messiah. Starts with the water turning into wine, party, and ends, the 7th sign is Lazarus rising from the dead. This is the measure of his life according to the Gospel of John. What does the number 7 mean? Unlike 157 fish, this actually holds gigantic weight in the scriptural narrative. What story? What early story? What is the first story that says 7? Creation. So, you have 7 days in creation, 7 miracles. The thing about the Gospel of John is there is a hidden 8th miracle. If the 7th miracle is the resurrection of Lazarus, what is the 8th miracle? His resurrection. What is the 8th day of the week? There is none. It's the first day of the new week. The 8th day is the first day of the new week. The resurrection of Jesus is the new creation. It is the new creation that John is declaring. And in this new creation, there are signs, there are similarities, there are word choices that remind you of the old creation that don't appear, it's not because the details are different. The other Gospels just have a different voice. In the Gospel of John, when the resurrection happens, where does it happen? When the women go to the tomb, where is the tomb located? In the middle of a city? No. In the middle of a town? No. Where is the tomb? The garden. I come to the garden alone. I am not soloing this church, don't worry. God gives many gifts. But he goes to the garden. Why is the garden important? Mary, she's sitting there weeping, and she thinks the resurrected Jesus is the gardener. Genesis 1. Where does the story start? In a city? In a town? On the road? It starts in a garden. What is the job that you could say God has by planting the garden? What is the job given to the first humans? Organize and cultivate the garden. So for Mary to look at the resurrected Jesus and to confuse him for the gardener? Yeah! It doesn't just stop there. There's the upper room. It says that the upper room, when the disciples are all gathered in the upper room, it is a dark room, and they are filled with fear for the Jews, right? They're all filled with fear that they're next. In Hebrew, the word would be tovu vavohu. I won't make you say it. Tovu vavohu, wild and waste. And Jesus appears, almost ethereal, because he somehow goes through the wall while the doors are yet locked. And he does what? We talked about this last week. He breathes on them. And I'll tell you the same joke. Jesus has been dead for 3 days, and he breathes on them. Really, Mentos, because that just seems gross. On the other hand, when you see that the 8th day, when you see Easter Sunday, the first Easter Sunday as the first day of the new creation, it happens in a garden, and the breath of Jesus, the word for breath in Greek is pneuma, in Hebrew, ruach. And it's in this dark, chaotic, scary place that the breath of God goes over this dark and scary place, and new life happens. I spent like my first month here talking about Genesis 1 and 2. I hope this is ringing for some folks. So, you get the breath of God working over this dark, scary place. It is clearly a reference to this new creation that the Spirit is still moving. So, you've got a garden, you've got Spirit and breath. And in this story, you got somebody being naked. Just like in the last story. In Genesis 3, why did the first humans, what did they do? They hid themselves, for they were naked. And it's not because their bodies. That's one thing to be sure of. God created your body. However your body is now, that is not what they were ashamed of. The whole nakedness is metaphor for consciousness, for self-awareness, for a recognition that you have done wrong or that you're not where you're supposed to be. When it says here that Peter covered himself because he was naked, it was the self-realization, I'm not where I'm supposed to be. It's not about fishing naked. It's, I shouldn't have been in the boat. I got to be somewhere else. And then here's the kicker. So, God encounters Peter. And what is Peter met with? Well, what was the first creation met with? Well, when God finally encounters his people, it's the whole fall. But in this story, God encounters people who are not where they should be, and God sets them on mission. God graces, embraces, and sets free even when we revert to previous versions of ourselves. Whether that is humanity as a whole, the disciples in a broad spectrum, or Peter as an individual, God embraces every phase that you have taken. Every form of you that has appeared in this world, God has chosen, embraced, graced, and saved, and loved just as you are. You didn't need to change for God to love you. I'm going to say that again. You didn't need to change for God to love you. No matter what kind of journey you've been on, and you are grateful for every step of the way, or you really wish God would have taught you those lessons some easier way, you did not need to change for God to love you. God loved you just as you are. So, when you think back, the whole point of this for me, the way this opens up, is I don't know about you, but there have been previous forms of Luke Nelson, right? I've gone through my closet, and I pull out like a hoodie or a shirt. I still have my wedding suit, and I'm like, that was like, an author, Rob Bell, put it like me, that was like 9 me's ago, right? You pull out that hoodie that you used to wear that every day. And you try it on now, and it seems to have almost lost its magic. It's a previous version of you. Some of the folks who've been around for a while, let me pull out your high school yearbook picture. Better, your junior high picture. Who thought that haircut looked good? The previous version of you. You ever have a hobby or a project or a job that you finally get back to, like this used to dog you, and then you try to do it again and you just can't? There's just no excitement in this project anymore? Previous version of you, that was 3 years ago, maybe 5 years ago. What the goal for what the lesson is here, what Jesus gives us permission to do, is to include that form of you, our past, however backfired it went, no matter what belabored us, the whole of creation, it includes and transcends. Your transformation into whoever God is calling you to be will include your whole story. And the faster you make peace with your past, the higher your transformation can go. To approach your past with tenderness, right? If somebody brings up a story, usually that's it. You've got friends that it's been 3 years since you spoke to them, 5 years since you spoke to them, and it's just the moment you start talking, you're like, it's like nothing changed. Those are great. But there's also folks, you might meet them at reunions and whatnot, friends from 5, 10, 15 years ago, and you just have to wonder what form of you they knew. You know what? Don't judge yourself for that. You can't hold on to that too tightly. When you look back, if you're like me and there's parts of your past that you just wish would have gone differently, and you're asking, what was I thinking? That job was killing me. I should have gotten out of that relationship 2 years before I did. I should have jumped into that situation with both feet rather than tiptoe my way into it. When you say it that was 6 me's ago, you got to do that with tenderness because sometimes a paycheck was involved. There were little humans that were depending on you. You were doing your absolute best, the best you knew how. You only had certain examples to go by. You want to both acknowledge exactly what happened to you in your past, in those past versions of yourself, whatever story you're carrying before you felt like you were enlightened or born again or spiritually transformed, or you suddenly you saw the way, you came out. What happened before happened. And to treat that with tenderness is an art form that might take your whole life to do. But I promise you, the more that you come to embrace who you were, the higher your transformation can go. The more your growth will actually take root in your life. Because you will find people who have not made peace with their former selves. You will find people who cannot acknowledge. One of the most frustrating things in life is when you find people who cannot acknowledge the growth in you. The funnest way, well, not fun. I don't know if I were to treat my 9-year-old like he was still 5, you think I'd hear about it? Parents of teenagers, if you were to treat them like they were 9, How would that go? Parents of adult children? Treat them like they're still in high school. Eventually, and I've also heard this, eventually the one guard against treating your adult children any differently is they are the keepers of the grandchildren. So you gotta give them some space. Once you've started to learn how to embrace your past and accept that you have growth and change, looking at others and recognizing that they had a past they may need to accept or to grow and to change, this is one of the key elements to every relationship you have. Whether it was to your parents, to your children, to your spouse, to your former spouse, to any partner you desire to have. What is the number one reason, outside of financial issues, the number of marriages that have gone their separate ways? Why? Because we grew apart. Because a previous form of you really connected, and for a long time. But over time, sometimes people do not grow together. That previous relationship, that previous life that you had still informs, challenges, and grows with you. And this isn't just about spiritual pain. You can take this so much bigger. Think of the conversation that we're trying to have about American history. Acknowledging where we are, what happened in our past as a country needs to happen if we are going to rise above any of the challenges we face today. To deny, suppress, and obliterate any part of our past, especially parts that are infecting the lives of current day citizens, will only play out to our detriment. It will only hold us back from real growth. We include and we transcend. Include and transcend. This is the way of the Spirit. You include, you acknowledge everything's going on, and you grow beyond. My theology of the gender identity of God, this is one of these things that keeps showing up, is yet again, is God male? Yes. Is God female? Also yes. God includes everything that means to be male, everything that means to be female, everything in between, and transcends. God is beyond gender, but also includes all things. This is why any metaphor for God is limited. All of our language, every word, you could assume every language that every human has ever said, every word we have spoken, we will not come close to describing the width, the depth, and the height that is the God we worship. Amen? So do not pin your theology on one word or one expression other than the expression of Jesus Christ. Amen. So, we include and we transform. To what purpose? When Jesus approaches Peter, do you love me? Feed my sheep. God frees us for mission, so that those who are hungry, for those who are not set free, for those who are limited, who are restrained, who are held back from encountering all that God has for them, that they might see and believe. That is at the end. That was written as the final verse of John. All of this is written so that you might believe that Jesus Christ is raised from the dead. May the life that we lead, the hurts, the pains, our wounds, but also our joys, our celebrations, all testify to a life redeemed by God. Amen.